I was in the middle of a shift at the mill when my phone buzzed in my vest pocket. It was a Tuesday in January, about 10:30 in the morning, cold enough that the windows in the control room had fogged up from the inside. The number wasn't one I had saved, a local area code, but unfamiliar. I almost let it ring out. I wish I had thought longer before answering. "Are you Leonard Marsh?" the voice said. A woman, maybe early 60s, slightly out of breath, the way people sound when they've been standing in the cold. "I am," I said. "My name is Beverly Comeau. I'm the estate appraiser your sister hired to go through your father's property out on Rowan Lake Road. I'm sorry to call so you can't work, Mr. Marsh, but I need you to come out here today if you're able. And I'd ask that you come by yourself. Don't bring your sister with you." I stood there with the phone against my ear and the hum of the mill floor coming through the walls, and I didn't say anything for a moment. I asked her what she'd found. She said she thought it was better if I saw it myself. My name is Leonard Marsh. I'm 53 years old. I grew up in Moncton, New Brunswick, the second of 2 children, and I have spent most of my adult life within 40 minutes of the house where I was born. My father, Gerald Marsh, passed away 11 months before that phone call. He was 78. Prostate cancer, diagnosed late, the way it so often is with men who don't go to the doctor until something has already gone wrong. He had lived alone on the property on Rowan Lake Road since my mother died when I was 26, and he had kept the house in the particular way of men who live alone for a long time. Functional, sparse, nothing moved unless there was a reason to move it. My older sister had handled most of the estate administration after Dad passed. She had always been closer to him in the practical sense. She knew where his papers were, who his accountant was, which drawer held the insurance documents. I had been the son who showed up for holidays and helped with firewood and drove him to appointments when he got too proud to ask her. We had a good relationship, my father and I. It was quiet the way relationships between certain fathers and sons are quiet, not cold, just economical. He didn't say much that he didn't mean. My sister had hired Beverly Comeau's firm to do a full appraisal of the personal property before the estate sale. This was standard. The house had 40 years of accumulation in it. Tools, furniture, books, equipment from when Dad had run a small electrical contracting business out of the garage before he retired. My sister was in Fredericton during the week and couldn't be there for every appraisal visit. I hadn't thought much about it. I told my supervisor I had a family matter and left the mill at 11. The drive out to Rowan Lake Road takes 25 minutes in good weather. That January, it took 40. The road off the highway hadn't been graded since the last snowfall, and I kept the truck in 4-wheel drive the whole way in. The property looked the way it always looked in winter, the birches along the driveway bare, the lake just visible through the tree line, the house settled under its cap of snow like it had always been there and expected to stay. Beverly Comeau was standing on the front step when I pulled in. She was a compact, serious-looking woman with reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair and a clipboard she wasn't writing on. She waited until I'd climbed out of the truck before she spoke. She said she'd found something in the back office, the room off the kitchen that Dad had used as a home office after he retired. She said she didn't think she should touch it until I'd seen it. I followed her inside. The house smelled the way it had always smelled. Old wood and the particular dusty warmth of a house that's been heated by a wood stove for decades. Beverly had set her equipment on the kitchen table. We walked past it and into the back office, which my father had kept locked with a simple push-button lock while he was alive. The key was on the ring the lawyer had given my sister, and my sister had passed a copy to me when the appraisal work started. Behind the desk, wedged between the back panel and the wall, Beverly had found an accordion file folder. Heavy duty, the kind with the elastic band closure. It had not been sitting loose. She said it had been held in place with 2 strips of electrical tape fixed to the bottom of the desk drawer cavity, positioned so that if you opened the drawer and looked in, you'd see nothing. You'd only find it if you pulled the entire drawer out and looked behind. My father had worked in electrical. He had known exactly how to hide something and make it look like nothing. The folder had my name written on the front of it in his handwriting. Not my sister's name, just mine. I stood in that cold back office and looked at it for a long moment. Beverly said she'd wait in the kitchen. She pulled the door mostly closed behind her. I appreciated that more than I knew how to say at the time. I took the folder to the desk and sat down in my father's chair. The elastic band was dry and snapped when I removed it. Inside the folder had 6 tabbed sections, the kind you'd label with a label maker. My father had always been organized, his estimates, his invoices, his tax returns, everything in order, everything cross-referenced, even this. The first section was labeled Account. Inside were photocopied bank statements, going back 4 years. Not his main checking account, which I recognized from the estate work. A different account. A savings account at a credit union in Sackville that I had not known existed, with a branch 40 minutes from Moncton. The statements showed regular deposits, monthly, ranging from $800 to $1,500. For 4 years. Every deposit was made in cash at the teller window. The total in the account when the last statement was printed, 3 months before my father died, was just over $72,000. I had to set the papers down and breathe for a moment. My father had been on a fixed income, a combination of CPP and OS and the small pension from the electrical union, which came to maybe $2,800 a month before tax. He'd owned the house outright. That was from my mother's life insurance paid off in the 90s. But there was no investment portfolio, no registered account beyond a modest RRSP he'd mostly depleted in the lean years after he retired. My sister had been supplementing his grocery money in the last 2 years of his life because things had gotten tight with the heating costs. Where $72,000 in cash had come from, I could not begin to understand. The second section was labeled Arrangement. This is where I had to read slowly. It was a handwritten document, 2 pages in my father's careful block printing. Not a legal document. A record. He described it as a record of a private financial arrangement entered into in May of 2019 between himself and my sister's husband, a man named Terence. I need to stop here and explain something about Terence because I think it matters. Terence had come into our family when he and my sister got together about 15 years ago. He was from outside the province originally, had done well in commercial real estate, and by the time they married he had money in a way that was noticeable without being loud about it. My sister had always done fine on her own. She was a regional manager for a national insurance company, but after Terence there was a different quality to their life. Nicer car, vacations, a cottage on the Northumberland shore. I had never had any reason to dislike him. He was cordial, occasionally generous, and he had always seemed to treat my sister well. He and my father had gotten along in the stiff, respectful way of men who have little in common but share a family. According to the document in the second section of that folder in May of 2019, Terence had approached my father privately. He had a business opportunity, he said, that required short-term capital that he couldn't access through conventional channels without triggering certain tax complications. He had asked my father to act as a pass-through. Money would flow through Dad's account and then back to a numbered company that Terence controlled. Dad would receive a fee, a monthly payment, in exchange for providing access to the account. Terence had told him it was a common arrangement. He had told him it was entirely legal. He had told him that the tax situation was complex and that Dad didn't need to understand the details, just to sign the account access authorization and let the transactions run. My father had agreed. He had needed the money. He had not wanted to ask us. I sat with that for a long time. The third section was labeled Concern. The entries here were dated, like a log. The first was from November of 2019, 6 months into the arrangement. My father had written that he had started to feel uneasy. A friend of his, a retired accountant he played cards with on Thursday nights, had mentioned offhandedly that the kind of arrangement Terence had described sounded to him like what was called money laundering. My father had written the words down and then written beneath them. I don't know if that's what this is. I don't want to believe it. He had asked Terence about it at Christmas that year. He had written that Terence had laughed it off. Said his friend didn't know what he was talking about. Said it was legal tax optimization, and that if my father wanted to stop the arrangement, Terence would of course understand, but that he'd have to repay the fees he'd already received, and that walking away from a signed agreement midterm could expose Dad to civil liability. He had suggested gently that my father speak to a lawyer before making any decisions. My father had written, "I don't have money for a lawyer, and I don't want to involve the children." He meant my sister and me. The entries in the concern section continued for another 2 years, growing more worried. A note about a news story he'd read about CRA investigations into account structuring schemes. A note about a conversation with his own accountant, not Terrence's people, his own, who had reviewed his tax returns and found nothing obviously wrong, but who had asked questions about certain deposits that my father had deflected. A note about a night he couldn't sleep and had sat at this desk until 4 in the morning trying to understand how something that had seemed like a favor for family had turned into something that kept him awake. The fourth section was labeled Evidence. This was the section that changed the temperature of the room. Inside were printed email exchanges between Terrence and another person, a company name I didn't recognize, registered in Alberta, discussing the flow of funds. The language was opaque the way corporate language is opaque when it's trying to be, but my father had annotated them in the margins in pencil, in his block printing. Arrows drawn to specific phrases, question marks. On one page, next to a line about consulting fees received, he had written, "There was no consulting. I did nothing for this money." There were also 2 printed documents that appeared to be wire transfer confirmations. The amounts were substantial. Amounts that added together over the period of the arrangement accounted for most of the cash my father had received and more that he hadn't. My father had written on the inside cover of this section, "I think he may have used my name for more than he told me. I am not a smart man about money, but I am not stupid either." He wasn't. He had been a tradesman. He had run a small business for 30 years. He had balanced his books by hand. He was not a man you could fool indefinitely. The 5th section was labeled Decision, a single page. My father had written, "I am not going to the police. If I go to the police, my daughter's life is destroyed. If he goes to prison, she goes through it with him. She does not know what he has done. I am certain she does not know. This is the only thing I am certain of. I am not going to tell Leonard either. Leonard would go straight to Terrence and that would end the same way." He was right about that. He had written, "I have decided to stop the arrangement. I told Terrence in March that I was done. He did not fight it. That scared me more than if he had. And then, I don't know what he will do next. I don't know if any of this comes back to me legally. I need someone to know what happened, in case it does. Leonard will know what to do better than anyone would expect him to. He has better judgment than he gives himself credit for. I am going to put this somewhere only Leonard would look. He is the only one who would think to look behind the drawer." He spent a whole summer afternoon behind that drawer when he was 9 years old hiding a tin of baseball cards from his sister. I had to step away from the desk. I went to the kitchen. Beverly Camo was sitting at the table with her clipboard and she looked up at me and didn't ask any questions. I asked her if I could have a few minutes. She said, "Take as long as I needed." I put on the kettle because I didn't know what else to do with my hands and because it was the thing my father had always done when something was hard. The 6th section was labeled for Leonard. It was a letter. 3 pages. I won't put all of it here, but the part I keep coming back to said this, "You are going to want to protect her from this. I understand. She is your sister and you love her. But protecting her doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means making sure the right people know what her husband did, so that if this ever comes back to touch her, she has a record that she was not part of it. The best thing you can do for her is the thing that will feel the least like protecting her. I know you'll figure out how to do that. You always did things the hard way because you knew the hard way was actually right." He had signed it the way he always signed cards for my birthday. Just his name, no dad, because he said that was understood. I sat at his kitchen table and drank tea I didn't taste for a long time. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Margaret Fournier, no relation to anyone in my family. She had been recommended by a colleague at the mill who'd used her for a property dispute. I reached her voicemail and left a message saying I needed to speak with her about a serious matter involving financial fraud and that I had documentation. She called me back within 2 hours, which told me she understood what serious meant. I met with her 2 days later. I brought the accordion folder. I didn't make copies first. She told me afterward that was the right instinct, that a single original chain of custody was better than multiples at that stage. She was quiet through most of what I told her. She asked 2 clarifying questions. When I finished, she said that what I was describing, if the documents supported it, could constitute participation in a money laundering scheme under the criminal code, and that the account structuring alone, the cash deposits designed to avoid CBSA reporting thresholds, could be a separate matter for FinTrack. She said she wanted a forensic accountant to look at the wire transfer documents before she went any further. She also said gently that I needed to think carefully about when and how to speak with my sister. I told her I'd thought about almost nothing else since Tuesday. She said, "Think about it more." I did. I thought about my sister's face at my father's funeral. I thought about how she had organized everything, the way she always organized everything, with that particular competence that I used to mistake for distance when we were younger, and that I understood now as love expressed through usefulness. I thought about what it would mean to tell her that the man she had built her life with had used our father as a vehicle for something that could have sent a 78-year-old man to a CRA audit in the last years of his life. I thought about my father, alone in this house, carrying this for 4 years. The forensic accountant's report took 3 weeks. When it came back, it confirmed what the documents suggested and added detail that made it worse. The numbered company in Alberta was one of 3. The total flow of funds through my father's account over the 4-year period was considerably more than the fees he'd received. My father had been used as what the accountant called a nominee account holder. He had received a fraction. The rest had moved through and out. Margaret connected with a detective at the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit in Moncton. The name of the officer was Corporal Arsenault. No first name given in the initial documentation, just the surname and rank, the way RC Fispas works. He reviewed the file and opened a formal investigation. The investigation took 7 months. My sister did not know that I had found the folder for the first 2 of those months. Margaret had advised me to wait until the investigation was far enough along that its trajectory was clear. I hated that period more than I knew how to articulate. I went for Sunday dinners at my sister's house in Fredericton 3 times during those months. I sat across from Terence at the dinner table. I passed him the bread. I asked about the cottage. He talked about a development project in Moncton he was excited about. He was entirely, effortlessly normal. I thought about my father at his kitchen table in the middle of the night. When Margaret told me the investigation had reached the point where my sister needed to know, I drove to Fredericton on a Wednesday afternoon. I asked Terence to leave the house, and when he looked at me in that careful, assessing way of his, I told him I needed to speak with my sister alone about our father's estate. He left. He probably knew something was wrong. He is not a stupid man either. I sat with my sister for 3 hours. I told her everything, all of it. I had the folder with me and I walked her through each section the way I'd gone through it alone. She didn't cry until the 5th section, the decision section. When she read the line about not wanting to destroy her life, she sat with that page in her hands for a long time, not reading it anymore, just holding it. Then she put it down on the table and she said, "Dad protected him for 4 years to protect me." I said, "Yes." She said, "And then he made sure she would find out." I said yes. She didn't say anything else for a while. Outside, it was getting dark early the way it does in March in New Brunswick. The kitchen light came on automatically. She asked me what happened now. I told her what Margaret had told me, that Terence would likely be notified of the investigation within the week, that she should retain her own counsel, separately from mine, that the evidence strongly suggested she had no knowledge of or involvement in what had happened, and that Margaret believed this would be clear to investigators, that the process would be hard and long and would not feel like justice for most of it. She said, "He sat at Dad's funeral and cried. I didn't have anything to say to that." Terence was formally notified of the investigation 11 days later. He retained a lawyer the same afternoon. He and my sister separated within the month. She asked him to leave and he left without contesting it, which was, Margaret said, consistent with someone who had reason not to want the details of a marriage aired in any proceeding. The charges came 18 months after that. Proceeds of crime, account structuring in violation of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act, 2 counts of fraud over $5,000, and 1 count related to the use of a third-party account holder without full disclosure. The criminal proceedings are still ongoing as I write this. I've been told that financial crime cases of this complexity can take years to fully resolve. The numbered companies have been traced. The money is largely not recoverable. Some of it has been clawed back through civil proceedings that Margaret is pursuing separately. But this will take time. My sister is fine is the answer to the thing people always want to know first. She is not fine in the way that means everything is good. She is fine in the way that means she is standing up and moving through her days, and that some days are easier than others. She moved back to Moncton. She is close enough that I see her every 2 or 3 weeks. We talk more now than we have since we were kids. There is something in shared catastrophe that cracks open things that had just quietly calcified over the years. I don't know if that makes it worth it. I don't think that's the right question to ask. The house on Rowan Lake Road sold last spring. A young couple from the city who wanted space. I was the one who did the final walkthrough before closing. I stood in the back office for a while. The drawer was still out from when Beverly had found the folder. I pushed it back in. It went in smoothly, the way my father had always kept things, fitted and exact. I have a copy of the letter now. Just the letter, the 6th section. I had it scanned and printed because I wanted to be able to keep it somewhere I wouldn't lose it. There are lines in it I come back to in the same way you come back to something that helps you understand something you couldn't see clearly before. The one I return to most often is near the end. He wrote, "I spent a long time being ashamed of being fooled. An intelligent man doesn't get fooled by his own family. But an intelligent man also trusts the people closest to him, and that trust is not stupidity. The man who gave him that trust is not the one who should be ashamed." I think about that distinction between being naive and being trusting, between being fooled and being betrayed. The difference is in who bears the responsibility for what happened. My father had made a mistake. He had trusted someone who had given him reason to trust, and then had done something beneath that trust. The mistake was understandable. The betrayal was not. He spent 4 years carrying something that wasn't his to carry, to protect people he loved. He documented everything carefully and quietly, and hid it in the one place he knew I would eventually look. He trusted me to know what to do with it. I think about him at that desk, late at night, the wood stove ticking as it cooled, the lake outside dark and still in the way it gets in November, writing in his block printing, trying to protect everyone and running out of ways to do it, making sure the evidence was there, making sure I would find it. He was a private man, my father. He didn't say much that he didn't mean, but he meant this.